All right, well, I think go ahead and get going. So good afternoon again. My name is Ted Brown. I'm going to be your host for the Microsoft and You webinar, Director of Product Management here at Ntiva. And today I'm excited to be talking to you all about Microsoft Intune is going to be the topic for today. So going through Microsoft Intune, which is also called Endpoint Manager, we're going to go through some couple key terms. I'll go a little bit what is Intune and what happens when a device is enrolled. Get a little bit into the Microsoft Application Management, which is also called MAM. Go into some differences between the Windows 10 and Windows 11 features on the different OS choices you have in there, and then give a couple examples of like Intune with conditional access. Sort of like the other webinars I've done in the past, the last couple, I'm going to do a couple demos as we go through it. Going to go just kind of show the nuances of what the portal looks like to give you kind of examples of what I'm talking about. So a little housekeeping as usual. So please use the Q&A sections for any and all questions related to this webinar. And also, like all the other webinars, I'm happy to answer any past questions that you might have come up since you've listened to the other webinars, such as Azure Virtual Desktop, the autopilot one I just last week, or maybe anything on NCE, the Microsoft New Commerce Experience, anything along those lines, please put it in the chat. And also, if you have any recommendations for future webinar topics you want to listen to or learn more about, please pop them in there as well. Definitely open to requests and kind of catering this to what you want to learn more about. So kind of getting into Intune, so a couple key terms. MDM, we've had this one up here a couple times. This is the mobile device management. It's a protocol service for mobile devices, computers, laptops, tablets, and phones, and allows you to have control of what's happening on those devices within your tenancy. So it allows you to have kind of complete control of those devices so you can wipe it, put application profiles on it, and have policies configured on it to make sure that it's secured as possible. And another possible way to do it with Intune is going to be what's called MAM, Mobile Application Management. It's a lightweight option, which is kind of nice for BYOD devices. And the reason for this is maybe you only want to protect web applications in the cloud and actually have to find policies against those. Then you can actually have applications that access it or devices access it, make sure that hit certain qualifications before they can be allowed to access the program or maybe even download information from it. So you don't have to have control of the device itself, but you can put the policies in the application and have it deliver downward. And the main point about that is you don't have to have the corporate ownership of the devices, which I think is key on this one. So it allows for BYD policies to come in place while still protecting all your information. So what is Intune? So Intune is actually known as Endpoint Manager today. It went through rebranding in 2019, but for me, I probably always think of it as Intune. In fact, almost all the SKUs with Microsoft 365 you look for, it actually refers still as Intune. So Intune equals Endpoint Manager. And it's a cloud-based service in Office 365 that focuses on MDM, mobile device management, as well as MAM, mobile application management. And the purpose of this, I think about as a key aspect of being an administrator of devices is to make sure you can protect and secure your organization resources and how they access the data within your systems. That's the biggest part of making sure you have control of everything within your organization is where does that data reside and what's accessing it? Is it secure? Do you want to allow access to it? And with that, you can actually do this all through Intune to make sure that you establish appropriate rights and policies on these devices so they can access your information securely and do what you want to do within those applications. Make sure they can't download, make sure they can't print, or maybe you just want to allow everything, but as long as the device meets some compliance needs, it's allowed to get in there. And it allows for multiple different ways to handle this. You can do, like I said, a corporate owned device policy where all your corporate devices are owned by the organization, and you can deliver them out potentially through the autopilot, just kind of like the webinar I did last week, where it has the defined policies and compliance policies put into place immediately on these machines. So you have those rules already set to go. So when the user gets it, they can access what they need. It's already dictated by the IT staff to make sure it's as secure as possible. Maybe you want to have the requirements for passwords already set on those devices, or maybe you want to have like a PIN that needs to be set for a VPN connections that's already created. That way users don't have to actually have those installed after the fact. They have it on the device and ready to go. Alternatively, maybe you want to have a BYOD policy. Just real quick with me, I was a big BYOD policy fan about 5, 6 years ago. I ran a basically a remote desktop farm that allowed about 3,000 people to access it. Now, with this, I thought was a great piece where you have control of the remote desktop system while allowing anybody access with a personal device to get into the system and have access to all their corporate information. Granted, it's a remote desktop, so none of the data is traversing it unless you download it. But nowadays, with all the risks going on in the out there in the wild, I do see the benefit of probably moving more to a corporate-owned device policy where you have full control over the devices. You can wipe them as you need it. You can see where they are, and you're not really worried or concerned about the fact that maybe that people have personal pictures or something like that on the device itself. Like I know my home computer has pictures of my kids, my family, and the last thing I want because maybe some breach that all of a sudden that gets wiped out of there because they need to take control of the PC and go that direction. So that's kind of the downside of the BYOD. But if you want to go down that path, you have that capacity and capability with the mobile application management. So maybe you want to allow access to web applications within Office 365. You want to be able to have people access to like the Word, Excel, the Outlook. And within there, you want to have specific rules and regulations that allow people to either access certain machines, certain aspects of those applications, or even download certain files to those applications. So it really puts some nice strenuous policies along that to make sure you're only allowing what you need. And with this, you can also control, like I said, devices and how they're used, including your mobile phones, your tablets, laptops, PCs. This supports Mac, it supports Windows, it supports Androids and iOS at iPad and iPhone devices. And like I said, you can configure policies on how applications are used. Now, with this next slide, I have a little bit of kind of how the Intune process works. And so I know there's kind of a lot of stuff happening on here. So I'll try to use a little bit of a laser point to kind of describe a little bit of this. So in here, you have the Microsoft Intune process right here. It's all within the cloud. And the Microsoft Intune comes with couple different features. You have the ability to configure devices. And with configure devices, you have the ability to create profiles, what you want to have installed on the device itself, and then configure also a configuration policy, how you want the device to handle and maintain certain aspects of the device. The next one is protection of data. How are you going to protect the data within it? So you have like application policies you have in there, how you can protect the applications, and then the device policies, device compliance policy allow to access those web applications. And then in that as well, you have the manage apps that you're going to actually be able to allow people to install and put onto their computer. Within here, you have a group targeting where you can actually put these configuration policy, compliance policies, mix and match if you wanted to. Maybe you only want like VPs to have certain rights and you only have them have all rights, or maybe you want to have people in the field, they're traveling a lot all over the place, going to, Wi-Fi, going to Starbucks or something like that, and they're accessing a whole bunch of Wi-Fi that might not be encrypted. You want to make sure to have VPN policies put on that so you can specify, hey, maybe this remote workforce here will always have to have the VPN connected back home, so we make sure all their connections are secure. You can do that with group targeting within here. Now, what happens here is this device is being enrolled into the system. This outside bar here kind of comes in, logs into Office 365, takes a look at your authorization and your authentication for that user and sees what part of the groups you're accessed. And then from there allows you certain line of business application, maybe some custom web apps, but then it kind of comes back down to potentially installing applications on your device. And once the applications on your device, that's when those device policies take effect of, hey, what was this device able to do? What's it able to access? And then it's going back up and forth between the Intune services. Maybe a new policy was released and it's checking in every 24 hours and making sure that if there's anything new going on, it's actually able to adhere to those new standards you set as an organization. So that's kind of how all this kind of flows through the Intune process. And it's a nice little way to kind of depict how the process happens. Now, what happens when a device is enrolled? So once the device is enrolled in MDM, mobile device management, once you get in there, you can see the devices that are enrolled and get an inventory and see what is actually being able to be accessed from the organization. So I kind of flipped over here. So you've seen this a couple of times, at least from the last webinar I did. I have a test tenancy I use called Tomorrow's Firm Today. And right in here is going to be the Endpoint Manager. So I'm at the dashboard here for Endpoint Manager. I can come into my dashboard and see current history and current live stats on the devices we have enrolled into the system. This has 5 Windows devices. These are virtual machines right now, but for all intents and purposes, they're basically a laptop that's out there in the field. Within this, I have 1 that's actually set as compliant and 4 that are non-compliant. So I can kind of get a nice little history of what's going on in my environment today. I can click on my devices, and once I click on my devices, like I mentioned before, you have the ability to see all your devices in one portal. So I can see here's my 5 machines. I have this nice green check mark by the one that is actually compliant, marked compliant, and the rest are not in a compliant state. I can click on to a machine here. And once I click on a machine here, it gives me some more information about the system itself. And then I can come into discovered apps and it'll tell me again what the applications are installed on that system. So if some reason I allowed a end user to install their own applications, it would appear here. Now with this, I'm able to actually define company and policies. So basically I have compliance policies. And so with my compliance policy, I have a compliance one I put together. And I can tell you, like you saw before, I have one that's actually adhering to this compliance standard. And I can see here why. I'm going to click on edit and click on device health. And it's telling me that I require BitLocker now for being able to access the system. So BitLocker encrypts your hard drive. So when you log into it for the first time, it will use that key to get into it to make sure to unencrypt the hard drive. This way, if someone ever steals your hard drive, steals your laptop, they're unable to actually break into the actual device itself, take out the hard drive and access the information that's onto it. So very, very key part of all this is encrypting those hard drives. And the cool part about this system, if you actually enroll it into Intune, it will make sure that people accessing the system have this requirement enabled onto their device, especially if it's a corporate-owned system or using autopilot. It'll automatically enroll it into BitLocker program and then roll out the keys appropriately. And the neat part about it as well is it will do the key part of maintaining the key itself, which is just, in case you ever lose the key, you won't be able to get access to it. So I can click into the one that's compliant, click into here, click on my recovery keys, and here's my recovery key to get into the system, just in case I lost a key or it's not connected anymore. I have the ability to unlock it if necessary, so it's not just a dead device out there in the field. Now, one thing I want to show here is this. I have another example. So here is a machine that I have running that's off of this Intune policy. So right here, this device is going to be demo 5. Desktop ONG. You can see that can relate over to this desktop right here. It's in a non-compliant state. And so within this, I have configured a policy, which is kind of a policy I would not actually configure in a production system. I'm going to click on configuration policies, go into my basic config. I can see here the configuration settings I have here. Now, if anyone has configured Active Directory or play within group policy, it's similar to that. So if I click on edit here, it'll give me a list of all certain different functions we're able to actually lock down and take configurations of once this pops up, very similar to what you potentially would see in Active Directory group policy. So you can see here all the different categories we have the ability to manipulate and define. And once you get into each one of these, you have the ability to find certain settings once it pops up. But for this one, I have actually enabled for the start feature on this device, basically to hide the restart and hide the shutdown. Again, would not put this in production. So I'm going to pop over here to my demo device. I'm going to click on the start button, click on power, and you can see here, I do not have the start or restart button in there. So to kind of show you how this can change, so this is the basic config, and we'll hide restart, hide shutdown, hit the read and save, allow that to come through. Now this policy would update automatically on this device within 24 hours, but for all intents and purposes for this demo, I want to make sure it happens a lot sooner than 24 hours. So I'm going to click on the device and go ahead and click sync. And so that will populate here very shortly. Let that run. Another thing you can do here, besides what kind of went through, is configuring the actual device enrollment process and getting the inventory on the device itself, is you can configure security compliance needs, kind of like what I showed for the BitLocker. You can also put there for maybe you don't want to have jailbroken devices. And this comes down to more like the iOS or Android systems, where you want to make sure that somebody hasn't bypassed the inherent security on the device itself that might make it a risk to accessing your corporate data. You never want to have a jailbroken machine, a handheld device or iPad device accessing your corporate data. So when I click on devices here, I can have Windows policy, iOS policy, Mac policy, and Android policy. Now they all kind of work slightly different because there's different OSs. So you have different policies based on them. So I can come into here and take a look at the policies in here for compliance needs for iPads and iOSs, and create a policy right in this direction. Great. Put a quick little test on this. Next. And then here I have device health, jailbroken. I would just go ahead and click block, hit next. And then as I enroll devices within this policy and apply it to those systems, it would not allow them to enroll. Now, the also neat part about this is you can actually define what happens when they don't meet these policies. So I'm going to come back to my compliance policy I have for Windows machines right here. You saw that I have 5 of them applied, only 1 is adhering to it. And it's because it doesn't have the BitLocker on it. But you have compliance settings, what's required, and what happens when it doesn't meet those compliance needs. So I can put on here saying, hey, I want to mark the device as compliant and basically have this set for 1 day to notify it for 1 day. Now I want to basically make sure that, hey, this person might need to get this device up to a compliance nature. Let's go ahead and send an email to the user. And I want to make sure that they have scheduled days after non-compliance. Let's go ahead and send it immediately. Then you can actually have templates that are going to kind of say what the actual email is going to say. And then what I want to do, hey, if they don't adhere by this, I'm going to retire the device itself after 10 days it's been found. So if they're not actually adhering to it by 9, immediately in 2 days, get that done. So that way, if it's not actually going into a compliant state, I can make sure it's removed from the system because that is not having any action taken on it. Other things you can do with the actual device that are enrolled, you can push certificates to the device. Also, you can make sure that people have Wi-Fi enabled or VPN connected to the system. So it's always nice when something connects to the system, a new device comes on, and you need to make sure to have your corporate Wi-Fi enabled on it. It can actually be brought down by a policy. And also, like I mentioned before, having the security nature, having a VPN connected to it, like a person always out in the field, you can enable that as well. So once they actually log into the system for the first time, it'll lay down that VPN access to their computer or to their device. With that as well, you can also see reports like I showed before about how you can see which devices meet the certain compliance natures. And with the compliance piece I was mentioning for, it's not necessarily just a one standard. You can create multiple compliance requirements if it met your needs. So just because I have one here that doesn't meet it for BitLocker, you can create multiple ones down here and have certain baselines that are being put down to certain segments of your organization that might have more stringent requirements, and seeing how there's reports and how people actually adhere to those standards. The other thing you can do with this is once a device is enrolled, you have the ability to remove the organization if it's lost. And I think most importantly here, wipe a device. I've been in the IT field for many, many years. There's been plenty of times where I had a call from the company owner going, I need to wipe this device. I don't know where is it? It's lost. It's been stolen. Please wipe everything off of it. Now with Intune, when they're enrolled, it gives that ability right at your fingertips. Now, the MDM solutions, the mobile device, if they're enrolled in there, it will wipe the full device. So when I come into my Windows machine, click onto this test desktop I have, I can hit wipe. This person called in, hey, my laptop got stolen. I can go ahead and wipe this device and go ahead and keep my user account in an enrolled state. And so that will look at the machine, send a policy to it to go ahead and wipe all the information off of it. Again, best with corporate owned machines, not BYOD devices. The last thing you want to do is take away somebody's full family history of pictures. And that's why it's best to use MDM with corporate owned devices. Now, I'm curious, I don't know if it's gone through yet, but let's take a look at the status here on this one. Let's see if this policy has gone through yet. So again, this is where I actually set it up so I cannot see the start and restart button. So we'll see if make sure that comes through. And our next topic we have here is mobile application management. So we went through the MDN, the mobile device management. Now we get into the mobile application management. Again, this is more for the protection of web applications, just like you would do on the desktop itself that you're protecting. So web applications, so it might be like an Outlook, a web version of Outlook, a web version of Excel, that you can actually put stringent policies on there and protect it in a certain way that you might not want to have people able to print devices, take screenshots of the system, being able to download data to the device. Maybe you want to make sure they can only download data to the device if the device is in a compliant state. So you can take a look at setting the specific measures to have a nice little reducing your risk when people are accessing these applications. And with that, you can actually configure potentially programs to do certain functionalities once they're installed on the computer. Maybe you want this program to be launched and run every time on a device when they boot it up. You can actually configure policies on the application, do certain things when people access it. And also, if you want to, you can do certain web applications to do certain functionality when you get into as well. Maybe you want to change where the autosave function is saving to, or you want to save how the templates are looking for. So you can actually make those changes within the system and the configuration of the applications and push that through to those protected apps. And that is done through the same portal itself. So you can see here, we have the MDM, the devices you're going to be using. And you also have the application side of the house. So you can go in here, what applications you're going to protect. And those come down to here to these policies that you have. So your application protection policy, as well as your application configure policy. So I can take a look at here. I got a quick test one I've put together. Click on properties, and you can see here, kind of gives a layout of what this policy is going to do for your system. So I can click on my targeted apps, and I can see here, this one is just going to be protecting basically Notepad out there in the system. And with the Notepad, it's going to make sure that your device has to handle certain stringent policies to make sure that, hey, if it's not configured within network boundaries, it's going to be blocked. Maybe allow certain PIN that security that needs to be on the device itself. It can't access it unless it has at least a 4-character PIN coming to the system. So it kind of to be able to take a look to see what's enrolled on the system itself to make sure you can actually access that application. And then you can also have app configuration policies. Now this gets into like what's going to happen on the device once it starts, manage applications. You can select public applications here. You can see on the right side, I have a list of a whole bunch of different applications that are already ready to go for us to kind of dictate what's going to happen with those applications when they're run from the system. And benefit beginning with this as well is you have the ability to do a remote wiping of the data from the apps itself. So once you have control of the application, you can remove the data. So you're not removing the data from the actual, you're not wiping the whole device, but say if you're using Outlook on a mobile device, that Outlook program on the mobile device can be managed by the mobile application manager. So you can actually wipe all the information on that Outlook that might be on the device. And that's where I think this comes into is most beneficial, because a lot of people are bringing their handhelds out to, they're bringing their phones out to the system that might be not corporate owned. And with this, you can actually define how you want certain applications to run on these mobile devices and say, hey, I want Outlook to be installed with everyone. I want to make sure all my employees have the ability to have email no matter where they are and be able to check it whenever they want. But I also want to make sure that they have certain protection on their phones to allow them to access that information. I want to make sure that they have a stringent policy on their password policy on their phone before they have the ability to install Outlook and have it come down on their machine or onto their iPhone or Android. So that way you can kind of really make sure that you have the correct policies in place to make sure that you have the access level you want to access the corporate data necessary for them to do their job. Now, with this, I've kind of gone into a little bit of like corporate owned devices and BYOD devices, and there's kind of like some nuances with that. So With personal owned devices and company owned devices, there's certain way you want to have them be joined to your organization. So if it's a personally owned device, you don't want to have that would like typically be like an AD join to your system, like you're controlling the device itself. With a corporate owned device, you're going to have this be a hybrid join, which kind of combines Active Directory on premise with a Azure Active Directory in the cloud, Azure ADP1 or P2, and allow those to actually communicate together. And this would be doing like an AD join, Azure AD join with the devices coming through autopilot or anything like that. But with a personal owned device, you have the ability to actually just kind of attach that through to your system through Azure AD registration. With that Azure AD registration, it will be able to take a look at what's going on the PC. Again, is it meeting the same requirements for password? Does it have compliance requirements that I want to put in place? And those can be added to the system afterwards. Now, what capability can this happen with? So with Windows, you need to make sure to have a Windows 10 Pro minimum at the minimum. It can't be a Windows Home OS. So it could be Pro, Business, Enterprise after that. And with a corporate owned system, you want to make sure you have cloud enabled features by license, like with the Intune, and be able to do MDM management through there. So that's kind of a key functionality. Make sure you have Intune license available to you. Now with Intune, you have the ability to actually get that with the Microsoft Business Premium, which is a $22 license, which includes Intune. It's the greatest deal out there with Microsoft products with the Microsoft 365 SKUs. You can also add in a la carte. Usually it's around $6 per Intune license to allow that functionality. And for installing applications, how do you do that? You can do installing applications with doing a company portal. So you can actually have a company portal that people log into, and it shows them what applications are allowed to be installed from the portal. And you can maybe want to be able to have Excel and Word and Outlook be able to put down in the machine. You can actually put them into a company portal and allow to have that come down through Intune. But with a company-owned device, you probably want to have this come out automatic enrollment, doing the Azure, doing an autopilot, kind of what I went through last month for a webinar of having this automatically put down the machines as they enroll into the environment. New machine can be purchased and automatically tagged to being enrolled. So once the end user boots it up, types in the username, it's configured and set to go immediately. So there's no need for actually traverse to an IT hands to install all the applications. And with this, with personal devices, you probably will be doing more of a mobile application management, or you can do an MDM option if you needed to. Again, I'd recommend staying with a mobile application management with personal owned devices. And with a corporate owned device, I would always go the route of an MDM, full control of these systems. You have full access to wipe it, know where everything is, and have full capacity to control everything that's going on those devices. And then with this, the last piece is the administrative access. So users on personal owned devices will typically always be local admins, where on company owned devices, it's not recommended, at least in my standpoint, to not have them be admins on the system. If once you're an admin on the system, you have the capacity to install, download, potentially bring malware to your system that can traverse your whole organization. So the best deal is to keep them as a local user and have the administrator be the one that has access to install applications. And more importantly, not necessarily be able to actually have to go to the machine to install it. They can do it from Intune, create a package for that application. It's maybe Adobe Reader, and have it pushed down to the computer through an autopilot or an enrolled machine, and push it down that new software package. And next thing you know, that company, that laptop has Adobe Reader and set to go. So for me, that's more the best way to go. And that's kind of why I've kind of flip-flopped. Again, 5 years ago, I've been on the BYOD bandwagon. Now I'm definitely on the corporate owned machine, full control. I know what's installed. I know how to deploy new software immediately to all these devices and have all the control at my fingertips to mitigate the risks out there in the wild that's going on, to make sure you have full control of these devices and control of your data, which for me is, if I was a business owner, the most important aspect of this whole deal. Now, the last couple of slides we have here, I know we're at the bottom of the hour. It's 12:30, but we have a couple more minutes to go through. So different features are available with different OS levels with MDM. So you can see here on the left-hand side, I have the Windows 10 Professional. Again, there's no Home Edition because it can't handle Intune. But you have Windows 10 Professional, Windows 10 Business, and you get into more of a security OS, which is going to be the Windows 10 Enterprise E3, and the Windows 10 Enterprise E5. Now, those last two OSs you can actually purchase and get from Office 365, like M365 E3 or M365 E5, which are great packages from Microsoft because they bundle in the OS of a laptop or desktop into the actual Exchange SKU, into your how you're going to put Office on your computer, Teams. It kind of bundles it all together, so you don't actually have to go purchase this. It's just included on a monthly charge continuously, and those have the most security features available. But on the left-hand side, you can see here what features are available within Intune to configure your Windows Information Protection, which was the mobile application manager, how you protect your mobile apps. You can configure that and allow all these devices to access that perfectly fine. Windows Hello for Business is a nice way of doing two-factor authentication. So you can actually set up to be maybe a bio thumbprint or a picture of yourself to make sure that it is you who is accessing the machine. So it does a two-factor authentication that's available in all of them. You can control how USBs are handled. You're going to block them or not. Make sure you can update it for Windows updates. And again, maybe lay down Microsoft Defender for anti-malware, for antivirus. Now, where it starts to differ is how you're going to manage BitLocker. Again, having control of making sure that the devices have encryption on their hard drive. So when you, for some reason this device gets stolen, you know your information is protected. You can do that with Windows 10 Professional, but it's not managed. You want to make sure, go to Windows 10 Business to make sure you have everything within their Intune system. So you have the keys necessary in case it gets the keys are lost. You need to get into it, because if you have an encrypted machine, you don't have the key, it's pretty much unable to get into it. Everything's lost at that point. You need to kind of start from scratch. Now, the other applications, the other OS levels get into more security features. You go all the way to the right-hand side, the Windows 10 Enterprise E5. You can see they got a yes all the way down. And when you get to the bottom, you got the endpoint data leak protection, endpoint detect and response. So again, it's making sure that you have more security in these machines, the higher OS level that you have. Now, Intune can do it all, but it can only push those policies and configurations to certain levels of an operating system. And last but not least, you have the ability with Intune to interact with conditional access. So conditional access is a portion of Azure AD P1 or P2, making sure that it has certain aspects of your device meet certain credentials or criteria to access the system. So I can make it say, hey, I want to make sure that everyone accessing Office365.com has MFA on their user profile. So no matter what, when the first person logs in, they don't have the MFA, it will require them to enroll in MFA and make sure they have access to it. Or for some reason, maybe I want to say with this conditional access, I want them to do MFA, but not on their local network if they're on their within the corporate boundaries. Now, again, I don't recommend doing that. I think MFA should be everywhere, but just kind of give an example. You can say, hey, if they're outside the organization's boundaries, their walls require MFA. But if they're inside the boundaries, don't require it, things like that. Maybe you want to do something like that with compliance levels. And so I kind of have here a quick description of how you would do something along those lines. So within conditional access, you can see here I've created this one of compliance login. And within this compliance login, I'm going to specify specific users. So I applied this to a group. I have my Autopilot Lab saying, hey, anybody that's part of this group, Autopilot Lab, I want to make sure that they access the system based on certain functionality. I want to make sure they get access to the system, but I want to make sure that they are required to have a device as compliant. And if the device is not compliant, well, first off, I want to make sure that they have certain applications. There are certain devices, they're Android, iOS, Windows, or a Microsoft or a Mac. I didn't include Windows Phone. There's not many Windows phones out there. I might have been the only one that had a Windows Phone back in the past. And I'm going to mark this as required to access. And I can see here on the bottom part, enabled, I have it set to on. I can do a report only to see who this might impact if I want to go live with it, but I like to put this on. And once I put this on, it makes sure that anybody that's not marked as a compliant device would not access the system. So anybody that was in this level here, if I did enable it, anybody that was not compliant, they would not be able to access Office 365 because they did not meet those needs. So combining the compliance profile that's dictated by Intune, I can now take those defined devices and actually put them to a controlled access level of accessing the system in entirety. So it kind of marries the two with the Azure ADP1 with Intune. So it's a nice little touch there. And I think that brings us to the end of our presentation here. So I'll go ahead and pause here to see if anyone has any questions. So please use the Q&A section of the Zoom if you have any questions you want to ask. Again, it can be to this webinar, it could be past webinars, or if you want, put in any future recommendations for any webinar recommendations you want to hear in the future. All right, going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. I really appreciate the time involved that you guys put into these webinars and joining and listening to what we have to deliver to you. So anything else, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. And also I look forward to talking to you next month. We're going to actually be going through basically going through Power Automate and kind of showing you how you can actually use Power Automate to automate certain functionalities within your business. And again, it doesn't have to be for anyone that knows code. Most people, if they know certain functionality, how they want to, like Excel to handle certain functionality of how it wants to go from one sheet to the next, Power Automate might give you the ability to automate certain functionalities you do on a daily basis to help save you time. Well, I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you very much.